From chaos to clarity, how to build habits that stick. Have you ever felt like your life is a whirlwind of chaos, where you're juggling a million things but never seem to get anywhere? Maybe you've tried starting a new habit, going to the gym, eating healthier, or even just reading a book before bed, but after a few days, it all falls apart. You're left wondering, why can't I just stick to anything? I get it. I've been there. There was a time in my life when I couldn't even commit to drinking a glass of water in the morning without forgetting half the week. It felt like I was running in circles, stuck in this frustrating loop of starting strong and then crashing hard. I remember this one moment vividly. I was 25, sitting in my tiny apartment, staring at a pile of dishes in the sink and a to-do list that seemed to mock me. I'd promised myself I'd start waking up early to work on my side hustle, but every morning, I'd hit snooze and wake up feeling like I'd already failed the day. I wasn't lazy. I wanted to change. I wanted to be one of those people who seemed to have it all together, who could set a goal and actually follow through. But every time I tried, it was like I was fighting a losing battle with myself. I'd get excited for a day or two, maybe even a week, and then life would get in the way. A late night at work, a fight with a friend, or just the temptation of scrolling through my phone, it was always something. And each time I slipped, I felt a little more defeated, like maybe I just wasn't built for consistency. What I didn't realize back then was that building habits isn't about willpower or being some kind of superhuman. It's not about forcing yourself to be perfect or flipping a switch to become a new person overnight. The truth is, habits are like planting a seed. You don't just toss it in the ground and expect a tree the next day. You water it, give it sunlight, and protect it from storms. Over time, with care, it grows stronger than you ever imagined. That's what I want to talk about today, how to go from that chaotic, stuck feeling to a place of clarity and confidence, where your habits work for you, not against you. Let's rewind to that messy apartment version of me. One day, I was scrolling online, procrastinating, of course, and I stumbled across a quote that hit me like a ton of bricks. You don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. I didn't fully get it at first, but it stuck with me. I started thinking about all the times I'd set big, shiny goals, like running a marathon or writing a book, and how I'd crash and burn because I had no plan to actually make them happen. I was trying to leap from zero to hero without building the bridge to get there. That's when I decided to try something different. Instead of aiming for a massive overhaul of my life, I picked one tiny thing to focus on, making my bed every morning. Sounds ridiculous, right? I mean, who cares about a made bed when you're trying to change your life? But I figured if I couldn't handle something that small, how was I going to tackle the big stuff? So, I committed to it. No excuses, no overthinking, just make the bed. The first few days were easy because it was new and kind of fun. But then came the mornings when I was rushed or tired, and I'd stand there staring at the blankets, tempted to skip it. What kept me going was this little trick I discovered. I tied making my bed to something I already did every day, brushing my teeth. As soon as I finished brushing, I'd walk straight to my bed and make it. It was like piggybacking a new habit onto an old one, so my brain didn't have to work so hard to remember. Here's the crazy part. That tiny habit started to change how I saw myself. Every time I made my bed, I felt a little spark of accomplishment, like I'd won a small battle before the day even started. It wasn't about the bed itself. It was about proving to myself that I could show up, even in a small way. That spark gave me the confidence to try other habits, like drinking water first thing in the morning or writing for 10 minutes a day. Slowly, I started to see that habits weren't about being perfect. They were about showing up consistently, even when it felt like nothing was happening. What I learned from that experience is that habits thrive when you make them ridiculously easy to start. If you're anything like I was, you might be thinking, okay, that sounds nice, but my life is too hectic for this. Trust me, I felt the same way. I was working long hours, dealing with stress, and barely had time to breathe, let alone build new habits. But the beauty of starting small is that it fits into any life, no matter how busy or overwhelming. You don't need hours of free time or endless motivation. You just need a tiny action and a way to make it stick. So there I was, making my bed every morning and feeling like I was finally getting a grip on things. But let's be real, life doesn't just hand you a win and call it a day. A few weeks into my bed-making streak, I hit a rough patch. Work got insane, I was barely sleeping, and one morning, I walked right past my bed without touching it. The next day, it happened again. I started to feel that old familiar guilt creeping in, like I was slipping back into my chaotic ways. But instead of giving up, I decided to figure out why it was so hard to keep going and what I could do to make it easier. That's when I realized something important. Habits don't stick because you're motivated. They stick because you've built a system that works even when you're not feeling it. Motivation is like a sunny day. It's great when it's there, but you can't count on it to show up every morning. So, I started digging into what made my bed-making habit work in the first place. It wasn't just that it was small, it was that I'd tied it to something I already did without thinking. Brushing my teeth was my cue, my signal to act. I didn't have to decide whether to make the bed. It just happened because I'd wired it into my routine. I started experimenting with this idea of cues for other habits I wanted to build. For example, I'd always wanted to stretch in the mornings because my back was killing me from sitting at a desk all day. But every time I tried, I'd forget or just feel too rushed. So, I decided to pair stretching with making my bed. As soon as the bed was done, I'd drop to the floor and do a quick 2-minute stretch. It wasn't a full yoga session or anything fancy, just enough to get my body moving. The first time I did it, I laughed at how awkward it felt, like I was a kid trying to follow a gym class routine. But after a few days, it started to feel natural, like it was just part of my morning. What I love about this approach is that it takes the pressure off. You don't have to rely on willpower or wait for the perfect moment to start. You just pick something you already do, like drinking coffee, checking your phone, or even walking through your front door, and use it as your trigger to do the new habit. It's like setting up a little domino effect in your day. One action leads to the next, and before you know it, you're doing the thing you've been wanting to do without even thinking about it. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Okay, that works for something small like stretching, but what about the big stuff, like working out regularly or writing a book? I had the same question. I mean, making my bed was great, but it wasn't going to get me to the gym or help me finish the novel I'd been dreaming about. So, I started applying the same logic to bigger habits, but with a twist. I broke them down into pieces so small they felt almost silly. For example, instead of saying, I'm going to work out for an hour every day, I told myself, I'll put on my gym shoes and walk to the front door. That's it. No pressure to actually go to the gym, just get the shoes on. 9 times out of 10, once I had my shoes on, I'd think, well, I'm already halfway there, and I'd end up doing a workout anyway. This idea of starting small and using cues changed everything for me. It was like I'd cracked a code I didn't even know existed. I started stacking habits together, creating these little chains throughout my day. After stretching, I'd drink a glass of water. After water, I'd write 1 sentence for my novel. None of it felt overwhelming because each piece was so tiny, but over time, those tiny pieces added up to something huge. I went from someone who couldn't stick to anything to someone who was writing every day, moving my body, and feeling more in control than I ever had. But here's the thing, life isn't always smooth sailing. Even with cues and small steps, there were days when I didn't feel like doing anything. I'd miss a day of writing or skip my stretches, and that old voice in my head would start whispering, see, you're messing up again. What I learned in those moments is that slipping up doesn't mean you've failed. It just means you're human. The key is to make it easy to jump back in. For me, that meant keeping my expectations low and focusing on the cue, not the outcome. If I missed a day of writing, I'd still sit down the next day and write 1 sentence. 1 sentence wasn't going to change the world, but it kept the habit alive. As I kept building these little habit chains, I started to notice something unexpected. I wasn't just getting better at sticking to things. I was starting to trust myself. That might sound weird, but if you've ever let yourself down over and over, you know how much it erodes your confidence. Every time I'd break a promise to myself, like saying I'd eat healthier and then ordering pizza 3 nights in a row, I'd feel like I couldn't rely on me. But these tiny habits, these small wins, were like deposits in a bank account of self-trust. Each time I showed up, even in the smallest way, I was proving to myself that I could do it. One habit that really drove this home for me was writing. I'd always wanted to write a book, but every time I tried, I'd get overwhelmed. I'd sit down, stare at a blank page, and feel like I had to produce something brilliant right away. Of course, that never worked. I'd write for a day or 2, then give up when it wasn't perfect. But after I started playing with cues and small steps, I approached writing differently. I told myself I'd write 1 sentence a day, right after I drank my morning water. Just 1 sentence. No pressure to make it good or to keep going. Some days, that's all I did. I'd write something like, the sky was blue, and call it a win. But most days, that 1 sentence turned into a paragraph, and sometimes a whole page. What blew my mind was how those sentences started to pile up. After a few months, I had pages and pages of ideas, rough, Messy, but real. I wasn't just writing, I was becoming a writer. Not because I was churning out masterpieces, but because I was showing up, day after day, in a way that felt doable. That's when I realized the real secret to building habits. It's not about the habit itself. It's about who you become in the process. Every time you stick to something, no matter how small, you're shaping a version of yourself who keeps promises, who shows up, who doesn't give up when things get tough. Now, I'm not saying it was all smooth from there. Life has a way of throwing curveballs, doesn't it? There were weeks when I was traveling or stressed, and my habits took a hit. I'd skip writing or forget to stretch, and I'd feel that old panic, like I was about to lose everything I'd built. But what saved me was learning to give myself grace. I stopped seeing a missed day as a failure and started seeing it as a pause. The trick was to get back to my cue as soon as I could. If I missed writing one morning, I'd make sure to drink my water the next day and write that one sentence. It was like hitting the reset button without starting from scratch. This idea of grace is so important because building habits isn't about being perfect. It's about being persistent. You're going to mess up. You're going to have days when you're too tired or too busy, and that's okay. What matters is that you don't let one slip turn into a slide. You pick yourself up, go back to your cue, and keep going. For me, that meant keeping my systems simple enough that I could always come back to them, no matter what was going on. My morning routine, bed, stretch, water, sentence, was like an anchor. Even on my worst days, I could do at least one of those things and feel like I hadn't lost my way. As I kept at it, I started to see my life shift in ways I never expected. The chaos that used to define my days, missed deadlines, cluttered spaces, constant stress, started to fade. Not because I became some productivity guru overnight, but because I'd built a foundation of small, reliable habits that held me steady. I was writing regularly, moving my body, even eating better because I'd tied meal prep to my evening routine. My apartment wasn't perfect, but it was no longer a disaster zone. I felt clearer, more focused, like I was finally steering my own ship instead of being tossed around by the waves. Here's what I want you to take away from this. You don't have to overhaul your life to build habits that stick. You don't need more time, more discipline, or a better version of yourself to start. You just need one small action, tied to something you already do, and the patience to keep showing up. Maybe it's drinking a glass of water after you brush your teeth, or taking 5 deep breaths when you get home from work. Whatever it is, make it so easy you can't fail, and let it grow from there. I think back to that guy in the messy apartment, staring at his to-do list, and feeling like he'd never figure it out. If I could talk to him now, I'd tell him, "You're not broken. You're not failing. You just need a better way to start." And that's what I want to tell you too. You're capable of so much more than you realize. You don't need to have it all together or know exactly where you're going. All you need is one tiny step, one little promise to yourself that you can keep today. So here's my challenge to you. Tonight, before you go to bed, pick one small habit you want to try. Maybe it's making your bed, writing a sentence, or even just putting your phone down for 5 minutes. Find something you already do every day, like making coffee or getting out of bed, and tie your new habit to it. Start so small it feels almost silly, and just see what happens. I'm not saying it'll change your life overnight, but I promise it'll plant a seed. And with a little care, that seed can grow into something incredible. You've got this. I'm rooting for you.